What's up, everyone? My name is Tyler. You are watching Mom's Basement MMA, and my next guest is a strawweight contender. She trains out of Carcinella MMA in New Jersey, and she joins me on the program once again. Her name is Mariah Castro. Mariah, welcome back to the program. Always a pleasure to have you. I'm glad that we can do this. It's been a minute.
I know we've been planning to do this for such a long time. Thankfully, I finally got a fight, so we had something to talk about. I like to wait until after I fight to talk.
Yes, ma'am. I completely understand. Mariah, for you, you are not just a professional mixed martial artist, but you're also like a big fan of MMA, and we talk about it often. And for you specifically, you've been a part of the game for a really long time, and I'm curious, like, whether you give me your perspective as a fan of MMA or as an actual fighter. Can you give me your take on just the state of women's mixed martial arts currently? I feel like there's a lot going on right now. We have Invicta that's revived, I guess, and that's going to be a thing again, apparently. But then there's also like this weird kind of thing going down where the regional women's mixed martial arts scene is kind of a dead scene. A lot of these gals are already fighting in Bellator and PFL and the UFC. There's really not a lot going on outside of like Combate and Invicta. What's your state on all of this, and how have you been navigating the challenges of the WMMA regional scene?
Well, I'm glad you actually mentioned. I was gonna say, Combate does have a lot of female talent, and I was thinking about it the other day, and I was saying, it's funny that you mentioned it. I was saying like, there's really no other organization right now that has so many women because I fought on an all women's card, so I met some of the women, and then like you see other events that they have, and you're like, wow, like they have a lot they have a lot of fighters in general, but for them to have so many, especially at my weight class, and 125, they have a good 125 division as well. But yeah, you are right. Everybody pretty much moved on. I'm really interested in seeing who made it to the contender series for this time around too, because I know there's definitely going to be some familiar faces. There usually is. And the UFC, as far as the UFC goes, I am looking forward to some of the fights that happen. I train with a couple of people that are in the UFC, so I just want to see where that goes as well.
I'm curious, like, what your advice would be to a younger gal that's just entering the regional scene, because it's a very small pool and you may not have a ton of experience to get a huge opportunity. Fatima Klein, someone that you're very familiar with, she is definitely in that category. Not a ton of experience per se, but she's fought on very big cards. She's headlined a lot of fights. She's the CFFC champion, or the champ, I guess I should say.
Double,
Like, what would your advice be to somebody who's brand new? Because Fatima is a great example of somebody who, yes, she has a few fights now, but not a ton of years in the game, and she's already on the cusp of getting into the UFC.
Actually, she's been around for a while. She's pretty young. It's funny because like I really look up to her, and like training with her is a really big thing for me, and it helped like my confidence. She helped a lot with my wrestling. But funny story, when I was just making my amateur debut or looking for one, they proposed her name. I had no idea who she was at the time. She was very young. She had to be maybe 18 or 19. But we didn't take the fight because they wanted it at 125. But then, later on we figure out who she was, and I'm like, wow, she's big. No wonder why they wanted it at 125. Now she makes 115, but obviously as an amateur, there was no reason for her to cut that extra weight. But as far as like somebody else that's coming on the regional scene, you do have to understand women move up faster. Everybody knows that. Like you said, there's a small pool. So you will stand out more. But you have to get on these shows, these farming organizations, right? Like you can do your regional shows, but you have to get on Combate, you have to get on CFFC, LFA, these kinds of shows if you want to get noticed, and you have to put on good performances, because think about the 125 women's division, right? It's kind of weak right now. So you can, if you're a phenom, you can stand out. Even strawweight is not too. You know what I mean? So you definitely have to stand out.
You weren't able to compete last summer following the Garcia fight. Can you fill in the gaps and kind of tell people who may not know, like, what happened with you last summer, and what have you kind of been up to up until June 8th?
Well, if you don't, for those of you who don't know, I was supposed to fight for Combate in August. I was getting my hands wrapped. Everything was all right. And then I get a last minute, maybe like 2 hours before I'm actually supposed to go on, I get notified that my opponent can't be medically cleared. But she had a medical emergency and couldn't compete. So I had one hand wrapped and I was, so locked in, and it just felt like physically, mentally, everything, emotionally, I was just aligned. The stars were kind of aligned, as they say. And so I kind of mourned that I didn't get to fight because I didn't get to use that space. Being in such a good space, you want to be able to use it. You don't always get it. Any fighter will tell you that. You don't always get to be 100% on. But, I wound up getting over it, and I used the time since then to really work on my wrestling. And we also determined that maybe I should stay away from 105 and just do like 110, 112, 115 until we get the call up if we do. Because it just, not to make any excuses as far as the Garcia fight, that's not what I'm doing. But as far as making atomweight, it's a little bit, I lost a lot of physicality, in that. So I feel optimal at 110. Unfortunately, it's not a real weight class, but all roads lead to 115, right? So
completely understand. Mariah, you competed June 8th. You went up against a Mexican girl, really tough. Ailed Zubieta. I probably butchered that name, but in any event, I looked at her, and this was a fight that was built up. Can you tell me a little bit, like, at what point did Combate reach out to you, and when did you find out that this was the person that you were going to be fighting against on June 8th?
It was probably, I want to say like the end of April, mid to end of April, that they had contacted me and made this fight. So I had a full camp. It was nice. I used it. I spent a lot of time wrestling because, in lieu of the Janet fight, like I got the takedowns off. But I just had to work on holding them down. Right. So it's like, when they hit the canvas, sometimes they bounce off the canvas and they get back up. So I spent a lot of time working on that. And then also just the confidence in, shooting the takedowns. Because I like to tie up a lot, not so much scholastic wrestling. So I worked a lot scholastic wrestling.
Was it hard to put together a game plan? Like, you and your coaches, you get the name, you figure out who the opponent is, who you're going to be fighting. Is it tough to game plan for somebody like this? This is a fighter that competed a lot in smaller promotions in Mexico. Probably not the easiest to pull tape on somebody like that. Does that make it more difficult from a strategy standpoint, or do you have to like just kind of worry about yourself and kind of like make your best guess in terms of like what the best path forward is in light of a circumstance such as that?
I will be honest with you. It probably would have been hard to find some things, but I didn't do any research on her. I took my coach did the research. I took what he said, and then, I just went with it. Everything that I found out about her, I found out after the fight. I didn't know that she had already had 5 fights. This was her first time fighting in America. I knew she was from Mexico, but I didn't know too much about her. And then, apparently she has good jiu-jitsu. I didn't really know too much about that either. My coach saw maybe one of her fights that ended really fast because she, the girl took her down and she swung for an armbar. So there wasn't a lot of research to be done, but I also don't do a lot personally. I just trust my coach and I say, okay, like, what's the game plan? What are we going to do? And obviously wrestling dictates, the pace dictates where the fight goes. So it's usually a safe option. I didn't go in there like I'm going to wrestle. I went in there to see what would happen. And then I just felt that it was easy, that she was, standing straight up. The level changes would be there. And I'm like, why would I make this more difficult than it needs to be? Keep in mind, it's a Mexican fighter for Combate. If it sees the cards, maybe they don't like me. I don't fit the mold.
Well, I think of you, and I predominantly think of, well, freestyle fighting, but like for you specifically in my mind, because maybe I'm biased just because I've seen most of your fights, I think of striking predominantly. I think of somebody with a boxing base, somebody that wants to go out there, throw a jab, and just hit you at all levels. I know you can do other things. I know you're a advanced jiu-jitsu practitioner as well. but the takedowns surprised me a little bit. Like, I've seen you hit those before, but I haven't seen you like hit takedowns like Hamzat Shemaev. Like, basically you're able to grab her leg and get her down anytime you wanted. And like, at what point did you like figure it out? Like, anytime I shoot on this girl, I'm going to be able to get her down. Were you able to discern that early on in the fight?
Yeah, like I always say, whatever you do in the training room is what you do in the fight. So muscle memory kind of like clicked, for me there. So I had no, like I said, the way she was standing, where she was like standing straight up, I knew she wouldn't get her hips back in time. I also just, not to diss everyone, but women's wrestling right now is still needs to be worked on. A lot of the fighters still need to really work on their wrestling. And I just feel like we do it 3 times a week. We wrestle like scholastically at my gym. It's super big. So while I do want to go out there and box, I understand that I'm an IQ fighter. I'm not a person that goes out there, beats on their chest. And, I know where I stand. It's going to be footwork. It's going to be some boxing. And then if I have to, it's going to be takedowns. What I thought was funny is that in commentating, one of the guys on there said my wrestling background, and I was like, I have no wrestling background. He was like, yeah, with her wrestling background. It's like, what?
I was also kind of thinking to myself, and maybe it's just me looking way too much into this, but there was a part of me as I was watching the fight, I was like, I'm wondering if she is giving up some of these takedowns because she's most comfortable on her back. Like, maybe she wants to hit these subs. Maybe she's trying to like bait her and like keep this fight predominantly on the ground. And I know, like, as this fight progresses, you're getting these takedowns, you're grappling with her for a little bit. Like, did she feel strong off her back at all? Like, did she threaten you with any submissions at any point in the fight where you really had to be careful?
So actually, in round 1, when I took her down initially, it caught me by surprise. It was so easy that I got so much momentum going forward. So on the single leg, I went a little too far forward, and that allowed her to kind of climb up and go for a triangle. So I was put in a triangle. What I thought was like, it wasn't very tight. I don't know if it's just because like we were skinny and her, you have to be really locked in for that. So I felt like there was a little bit of space. If you watch the fight, you'll see me just kind of trying to be patient. And then I hear her coach kind of like calling for the armbar. So I stuck my arm out like just to get her to go for it, because it would be easier to step over and escape the armbar than it is a triangle. So I wound up doing that. And then I kind of understood what I was looking at. Because remember, I went in blind. I didn't really know what I was expecting. I'm just like, oh, it's going to be a tough girl from Mexico. Like, it'd be my third. You know what I mean? It's like I keep getting tough girls from Mexico, but you don't know what to expect. But yeah, so she did in the first round have me in that. She tried a knee bar attempt, but she was a little bit too low. So there wasn't really a threat there. But after those 2 scenarios, I knew what I was dealing with. And I was like, okay, it was just smash.
You put on a dominant performance, Mariah. I would say it's probably the most dominant performance I've seen out of your pro career to date. At any point in the fight, are you having to make any adjustments? Did your coach ever ask you to make particular adjustments over the course of this fight? And the second part of that question, Combate, it's an open scoring system. Are you aware of these scores as you're going into the rounds, or are you the type of gal that, you know what, I don't want to know, just tell me what I need, tell me my adjustments, and I'll go out there and execute them?
No, I'm like, I hit the stool and I'm like, did I win the round? Like, I need to know immediately. So some people you may not want to tell, right? It's up to the coach. The fighter can't see the scores. It's up to the coach. There's some guys you may not want to tell. Maybe it makes them nervous. Maybe they'll start coasting and you don't want them to coast, whatever the reason is. He'll tell me. So after the first round, he told me, okay, I won it. He said, all she has is arm bars and triangles. Like, you got it. That's all he kept really telling me. Like, listen, she has nothing else for you. Keep doing what you're doing. It was really a lot of affirming, it was probably the most affirming advice that I've ever gotten. Right. I expected him to like freak out when I was in the triangle, to freak out at that stuff. And he was like super calm. So that took me by surprise, and you know, I felt great. I wasn't breathing heavy. I didn't even take my mouthpiece out between rounds. Like, it was just, it was looking good for us after the first round. Right when you're dry, those submissions are you know, a little bit trickier, but as you start to sweat, then, you know, I kind of like slip my arm out. I'm like, you know, so it's pretty good.
Well, I have to give you a much deserved congratulations. I know you waited a long time to get back into that win column, and there's like you're not a very emotional person, but like in that moment, you get your hand raised and like you seemed emotional. You seemed like you know, was it relief? Was it just elation? Like, can you tell me like what were some of the things that are going through your mind having waited the amount of time that you had to wait to get your arm raised again?
Oh my God, it was relief, it was elation, it was just, it was a lot. It was also like a little bit of like a removal of the chip, you know, like there was a little bit of a chip that I had, because it's like, you know, you've been trying to erase your last fight as you know, as it was, because you're only as good as your last fight, right? So
Right.
you're really trying to bury that thing, and then it's like I had about maybe three cancellations after that. In that time, it was like all August, November, and then this past April, I was supposed to fight. That got pushed back as well. So, you know, then I started to get a little bit of like a PTSD of like, am I gonna fight? Are they gonna back out? Is this one gonna show up? So, and you know what, I pushed myself a lot in the camp. I started out kind of feeling, you know, I wasn't in the best place, but I dug myself out, and then, you know, I'm glad it worked.
What was the first delicious meal that you ate after you won?
Um, we went to an Argentinian steakhouse,
Well,
and
there we go.
yeah, and they had like an assortment. It was really cool because they have it like almost like Rodizio style,
Hmm.
so you can get like several options. So I really ate.
And did you drink a beer?
I had sangria.
Okay, that's even better then. Who doesn't like some cold wine with fruit in
Yeah,
it? It's delicious.
yeah.
Well, congratulations to you, Mariah. And for everyone else that's out there, like, at what point are you going to, like, do you have like a tentative date? Are you still talking with the promotion to kind of figure out what's next for you? Like, what are we kind of looking at as far as when we can expect you back in the cage?
Personally, I like September. I believe they will be having events in September. Worst case scenario, October, but we're really aiming for September. Obviously, like, not fighting for a year. Like, I didn't feel rusty or anything, but you know, nobody wants to wait a year to do that. Every month matters. I'm no spring chicken. So I would say probably maybe the end of September.
Got a big pay-per-view coming up. Tell me a couple of fights that you're looking forward to seeing on UFC. What are we on? 303 now? And who do you got winning the main event? Are you going with Yuri Prohaska, or do you think Poatan is going to be able to defend his belt and still?
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with Pereira. I'm not gonna lie. I think Yuri's kind of like. I don't want to say he's a fraud. Okay, I don't want to use the word fraud because I feel like it might be a little bit too strong.
Sure.
But I do like really question his ability. I think, you know, like if you look at the Rakic fight, right? Whatever
Mhm.
happened, I guess he gassed out Rakic, but like he was literally beating the shit out of Yuri.
Well, Yuri does get hit a lot. I think that's a fair statement. Like, he's dangerous, but he definitely can get hit a lot. I think that's
Alex
okay.
is fucking huge.
I,
Have you seen him recently? He put on even more mass. So I don't know.
he,
I'm really.
what are we thinking? Left hook? That left hook first round? Is that how you see it?
It could be first round, or I mean, his best chance is early, right? When you catch somebody cold, that's really the best. But I will say, like, he's not a fast starter per se, Alex. So that's the only reason why I'm not saying first round. But definitely inside of three. I feel like inside of three for sure.
Tell me what else. Okay, so you know, I will. I won't be Tito Ortiz. Let me tell you what you're thinking. But we also got a few other interesting ones on here. Brian Ortega will be fighting Diego Lopez. That's the
Yeah,
co-main
I
event.
wanted
That's
to
going to
talk
be a
about
freaking
that one.
banger. I got Diego Lopez. Who do you got in that one?
So, you know, we actually talked about this one before. I do understand with Brian that he's faced the best of the best.
Mm-hmm.
Is he gonna get put through more fire than he did with Volk, or Max or any of these guys? Like, I don't know, right? He's durable. I understand that, like, his last few performances, like, he seems to be like on a decline for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I do think that Diego can capitalize on that decline for sure. He's a fucking animal. So I'm actually looking forward to that fight probably more than the Pereira and Yuri fight, if I'm honest.
And I'll ask you, we have a notable fight in the women's bantamweight division. It's Mayra Buena Silva. She'll be going up against Macy Chasson. That's an interesting one to me because we saw Bueno Silva go out there and fight Pennington, and it was definitely a snooze fest, but she talked a lot of shit. She talked a lot about, like, being the next big thing at 135 pounds. Of course, that didn't end up happening. Pennington does what she always does, gets her in a clinch and then pitter-patters. But hey, Pennington's a champ. I'm not trying to talk too much shit, but I just didn't like that fight too much. Can she turn it around and get a victory over somebody like Macy Chasson, who's really good, struggles a little bit with just activity, but she seems to be healthy for a change? I like what I see from Chasson when she's active. How do you see that fight going down?
I think it's a good matchup for Bueno Silva, if I'm honest, because, again, the wrestling, right? She just didn't have good wrestling and clinch, and that's what Raquel is really known for. I mean, it's not the most exciting, but it won her the fight, right? So if she doesn't go against a grinder, then it's her fight. That's the way I feel about Bueno Silva. And she was riding her high, and that's why she was talking the way she was talking. She didn't get wrestle fucked before, right? When you experience that, then you kind of get that reality check where it's like, oh, all right then. But Chasson's not that. So I like the fight for Bueno Silva.
And my final UFC question, Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler. Of course, that was supposed to be the original headline fight. Conor McGregor, he pulls out due to injury. Do you ever see him returning back to the octagon? Do you envision a future in which him and Chandler are ever going to fight? Or do you think we've maybe seen kind of all there is to see with the Mac? Do you think he just kind of rides off into the sunset and does whatever billionaires do in their twilight years?
I do think he comes back. Now, I'm not entirely sure. He said he has 3 fights left on his contract. I don't think he does 3. That I'll say. I don't think he does 3. And I'm questioning if he does fight Chandler. I am questioning if he's the one. And it's fucked up if they don't give Chandler the fight because, he's going on more than 2 years of being idle to get his payday. They said it's going to be 10 times the amount that he would make anywhere else. Like, a person is not going to pass up that opportunity. They're going to wait, right? But I don't think it's the draw that Conor wants. He wants a draw. He wants this big name, but he wants also a winnable fight, right? I'm actually surprised that they elected to do a fight with Chandler and just not do like the Nate trilogy, right? Or something like that, where it's not a super risky fight, but it makes money. Yeah, this is a risky fight for him.
It is a risky fight. I think for me, in terms of just from a pure finance / fandom aspect. Now, I'm not saying it would make maybe a whole lot of sense for all parties, but I think a fight with Max Holloway for the BMF belt, I mean, that to me, I look at that and I'm just like, for Max, that's a tough sell. It's like, do you really want to defend like a stupid belt again? But if it's Conor McGregor, he might be a little more compelled for something like that. That would be a huge money fight.
Everybody says no.
And for Conor McGregor, I mean, how could the prospect of fighting a guy like Max Holloway, like, that has got to be getting you up out of bed every day. Max ain't shooting on anybody, and you know exactly how that fight's going to play out. Like, stylistically, I think that would be very similar to that Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway matchup, or something like that. Like, you're going to get like a stand-up violent fight for however long it lasts.
I actually like that matchup better than I like Holloway and Topuria. I think it's kind of like, I get fans are going to want to see what they want to see. But I do think that Max, he's at kind of like toward the end of his career, right? So it should be like legacy fights. And the legacy fight would be getting that back from when he was a kid and he lost to Conor, right? Wouldn't that be? And then it's his red panty night. He makes more money than he's ever going to make. And then he rides off into the sunset. That's why nobody says no to Conor. We've lost fights for way less money. Like, if anything happens, right? You're like, I've lost fights for less money. Fuck that. I'm fighting you. Like,
completely understand. And I would be remiss. We could sit here. I could ask you about fights all day, but there's one other real big fight that'll be happening in the summer, and it's going to be Dricus du Plessis going up against Israel Adesanya, UFC 305. That happens on August 17th. That's an interesting fight, right? Like, it's weird because Israel Adesanya, he lost to Sean Strickland. He's been away for a while, and rather than let Strickland have the opportunity, Strickland loses by split decision. He doesn't get an opportunity to get a rematch. Instead, they elect to go forward with this particular matchup. What are your thoughts on it, and how do you see it one going down?
I think Izzy wins this one. In my opinion, it's really like, if you sit here and you try to do the MMA math, you'll be confused, right? I think styles make fights, and I think Izzy. People forget, like, yeah, he got caught off guard. The times that he got taken down, he didn't expect the person to shoot, so it does happen, right, like that. But his takedown defense is actually really good, and his footwork is good. He doesn't often get caught up against the cage and clinched and grind it out, which is what Dricus wants to do. So I like that fight for him, and his cardio is better.
Well, there you have it, Mariah. I appreciate your time this afternoon. And I want to give you the final word. If there's anyone that you wanted to shout out or any teammates that you wanted to thank, whatever, let's do it.
As always, shout out to you. Shout out to my team, Carnicella MMA. And then just shout out Durante Physical Therapy for taking care of me. All right.
Mariah, you're the best. Thank you for being on The People's Show. And I look forward to having you back later on this summer.
We'll do that soon.